In today's video, I'm going to share with you 3 terrifying stories that involves people being possessed by some entities. These 3 stories inspired 3 of the best horror movies ever made. However, the reality is darker than the movies. But before we get there, welcome to Black Box Obscure, the channel where we uncover the best stories from urban legends to unsolved mysteries and anything in between. And if you enjoy even one single video from this channel, make sure to subscribe so you never miss any of our videos. So without further ado, let's open the black box. Bathsheba was born in 1812, deep in the rural heart of Rhode Island. In 1844, she married Justin Sherman, and together they occupied the Old Arnold estate in Harrisville, a sprawling, lonely farmhouse built in 1736. In her youth, Bathsheba was described as a woman of striking yet severe beauty. However, as the year passed, the townspeople of Harrisville began to view her with suspicion. She was known for an icy temperament and a cruel streak. Rumors whispered that she treated her farmhands with unnecessary brutality. But the rumors turned into a localized panic when an infant died under her care. The story goes that the child was found with a large sewing needle driven into the base of his skull. The community was convinced Bathsheba had offered the child as a blood sacrifice to the devil. Lacking physical evidence, the court acquitted her, but the court of public opinion was not so kind. She spent the rest of her days as a recluse, a witch in the eyes of neighbors, supposedly spending her nights performing dark rituals in the woods behind her house. As Bathsheba aged, the legend says her body began to wither in an unnatural way. When she died in 1885, the town doctor reportedly commented that her corpse looked as though it had turned to stone, a grey petrified husk of a human being. Folklore claims that before she died, she climbed a tree on the property, the same tree often depicted in horror lore, and hanged herself, screaming a curse that she would haunt anyone who dared to occupy her land. She was buried in the Harrisville cemetery, but even in death, she found no peace. Her headstone has been broken and vandalized countless times by those seeking to keep the witch in her grave. However, the story doesn't end here. The legend lay dormant until January 1971, when Roger and Carolyn Perron moved their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April, into the farmhouse that once belonged to Bathsheba Sherman. The haunting of the Perron family is widely considered one of the most intense and well-documented cases in paranormal history, and it inspired the movie The Conjuring. While the movie brought it to the world, the real details, as recorded by the eldest daughter, Andrea Perron, in her trilogy House of Darkness, House of Light, are often more disturbing than the movie. When Roger and Carolyn Perron moved into the Old Arnold estate in January 1971, they didn't immediately feel a sense of evil. In fact, many of the spirits were described as benign or even friendly. Carolyn would often hear the distinct sound of a broom sweeping in the kitchen. She would walk in to find the room empty, but sometimes a small pile of dirt would be neatly gathered in the center of the floor. Some entities were seen tucking the girls into bed at night or gently kissing them on the forehead. The youngest daughter, April, claimed to have befriended the ghost of a young boy named Oliver, whom she frequently played with. The atmosphere shifted as the darker entity began to target Carolyn. The family eventually identified this spirit as a woman with a broken neck. This spirit was described as having a face like a desiccated hornet's nest. This spirit was incredibly jealous of Carolyn's role as a mother and mistress of the house. Carolyn began waking up with mysterious puncture wounds in her limbs, as someone would stab her in the limbs with a large needle. The children weren't spared either. Cindy was reportedly dragged out of her bed by invisible hands, and once she experienced a drowning attempt while in the bathtub, leading her to refuse to take baths for years. In 1974, the family grew so desperate, they called Ed and Lorraine Warren, famous paranormal investigators. The Warrens believed the house was being haunted by the spirit of Bathsheba Sherman. Now, unlike the movies where the Warrens are the heroes of the day who are saving everyone, the real Perron family has a complicated relationship with them. They believe the Warrens actually worsened the situation. Weeks after they were called to help the Perron family, Ed and Lorraine Warren decided to have a seance in the basement. Andrea Perron, one of the daughters who secretly watched from the shadows, describes the horrific scene. Her mother's chair levitated and Carolyn began speaking in a guttural, non-human language. She was then thrown across the room with such force that her head struck the floor repeatedly. Roger Perron, terrified for his wife's life and mental health, physically struck Ed Warren and ordered the couple to leave the house immediately. Contrary to the films, the parents did not leave the house after that. They were financially trapped. They didn't have the money to buy a new place and move out. For 6 more years, they lived in coexistence with these entities. They learned which rooms to avoid and how to speak to the spirits so they can keep them calm. Andrea later described it as living in a dimensional hole. They weren't just living in a house, they were living in a place where the veil between life and death had completely dissolved. Finally, in 1980, the family was able to sell the house and flee to Georgia. As they drove away, they didn't look back. They left the witch of Rhode Island behind, but the scars, both physical and psychological, remain with the family for the rest of their lives. Anneliese was born in 1952 in a small beautiful village in Bavaria, Germany. She grew up in a very religious Catholic family. People describe her as a kind, bright and happy girl who loved music and hoped to become a teacher one day. However, when she was 16 years old, everything began to change. One day at school, she suddenly blacked out. Her body went stiff and she couldn't control her movements. Doctors diagnosed her with temporal lobar epilepsy, a condition that can cause seizures and hallucinations. Anneliese was given medicine for her seizures, but it didn't seem to help. In fact, things got even worse. While praying, she started seeing grimaces, these horrible demonic faces staring at her. She also began to hear voices that whispered that she was damned and she would rot in hell. In 1973, Anneliese was suffering from deep depression. She grew frustrated because the medical treatments weren't stopping the visions. Because she was so religious, she and her family began to wonder, is this a medical problem or is something spiritual? Her behavior became increasingly strange and frightening. According to witnesses, she would scream for hours. She would bark and bite her family. She gained incredible strength, once breaking a thick rosary with her bare hands. She developed a deep hatred for holy objects like crucifixes and holy water. She stopped eating, claiming that the demons won't let her eat. Convinced that she was possessed, Anneliese's parents stopped looking for medical help and turned to church. After being rejected several times, they finally found 2 priests, Father Ernest Alt and Father Arnold Renz, who believed her. In September 1975, the bishop gave them permission to perform the Rituale Romanum, the official Catholic rite of exorcism. For the next 10 months, Anneliese underwent 67 sessions of exorcism. Some of these sessions lasted for up to 4 hours. During these rites, Anneliese would speak in different voices. She claimed she was possessed by several spirits, including Lucifer, Judas, Nero, and Cain. The priest recorded many of these sessions on cassette tapes. On the tapes, you can hear Anneliese growling, screaming, and arguing with the priest in languages she had never learned. Anneliese became obsessed with atonement. She believed she was suffering to save the souls of others. She would perform hundreds of genuflections until her knee joints tore and her bones broke. By the summer of 1976, Anneliese was in a terrible state. She refused to eat, believing that her starvation would weaken the demons, and she became extremely thin and weak. On July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel passed away in her sleep. She was only 23 years old. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration. At the time of her death, she weighed only 68 pounds. Her last words to her mother were reportedly, "Mother, I'm afraid." The story didn't end with her death. The German government charged her parents and the 2 priests for negligent homicide. The trial was a sensation. The defense played the audio tapes of the exorcism to prove that she was possessed. However, the doctors argued that she had been suffering from treatable mental illness and that her death could have been prevented with a feeding tube. The court found all 4 defendants guilty. They were sentenced to 6 months in prison, which was later changed to 3 years of probation. The court ruled that while the parents and priests truly believed they were helping, they had the legal duty to call for medical doctors when her life was in danger. This case was so famous that it inspired the 2005 sensational movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Today, Anneliese's grave remains a place of pilgrimage for some who believe she was a saintly girl who fought a literal battle against evil. For others, it is a sad reminder of what happens when mental health issues are misunderstood. Our story begins in the late 1800s. Anna was a normal, happy girl who grew up in a very religious home. She loved going to church and saying her prayers. But according to the old records, her father, a man named Jacob, was not a kind person. It was whispered that he and Anna's aunt were involved in witchcraft. They didn't like how religious Anna was. The story goes that they wanted to break her spirit. They began to put strange herbs and blessed powders into her food, but these were not holy blessings. They were meant to be curses. By age 14, Anna began to change. She stopped wanting to pray, and when she walked into a church, she felt this terrible weight on her chest. She started having fits where she would scream and say things that she didn't even remember. In 1912, when Anna was a young woman, some members of her family realized this wasn't just a physical sickness. They called a priest named Father Theophilus Reisinger to perform an exorcism. For a short time, it worked. Anna felt like the darkness had left her. She went back to her life, but for the next 16 years, the darkness was actually hiding, growing stronger and waiting for the right moment to return. In 1928, the trouble came back, and it was much worse. Anna was now in her 40s. She couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. She said she heard these voices in her head constantly mocking her. Father Theophilus knew he needed a safe place to help her. He took her to a quiet convent in Erling, Iowa. This was a place where nuns lived and prayed. He thought the peace of the convent would help, but as soon as Anna stepped onto the grounds, she went wild. It took several strong people just to get her inside. What followed were 23 days of what the witnesses called spiritual war. The priest, a few helpers, and the nuns stayed in a room with Anna. They locked the doors so that no one could see what happens inside. Even though Anna was a small woman, she became as strong as a giant. She would try to jump out of the bed and attack the priest. The witnesses said her body would swell up until she looked like she was going to pop. Her face would twist and change until she looked like a completely different person. Sometimes a man, sometimes a monster. One of the most famous parts of the story happened during the prayers. While Father Theophilus was reading from his book, Anna's body suddenly lifted off the bed, and she flew through the air and stuck to the wall above the door. The people in the room had to pull her down with all their strength. Anna's voice changed into a deep, scary growl, but her mouth didn't really move. The voices claimed to be different people. One voice said it was Beelzebub, another voice claimed to be Judas, but the most heartbreakingly voice was the one of her father. It bragged about how he had cursed her and how he was punishing her from the grave. The room became a place of nightmares. Witnesses said a foul smell like rotting meat filled the air even though the room was clean. Anna also began to speak in languages she had never studied. She would scream in Latin, Hebrew, and German. She would mock the priest by telling him about sins he had committed in secrets, things only he could know. By the third week, everyone was exhausted. Father Theophilus had lost weight and hadn't slept, and Anna was skin and bones because she couldn't keep food down. On December 23rd, 1928, 2 days before Christmas, Father Theophilus made one last stand. He prayed with everything he had. Suddenly, a piercing scream filled the convent. Anna's body went limp and fell back onto the bed. The room went cold, and then suddenly, very peaceful. Anna opened her eyes. The monsters in her voice were gone. In a very soft, tired voice, she said, "My Jesus, mercy. Praise be Jesus Christ." And for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Anna stayed at the convent for a while to get her strength back. She lived for many more years, and those who knew her said she was a kind, quiet woman until she passed away in 1941. A few years after the exorcism, a book called Begone Satan was published. It told the whole story in detail. This book was sold all over the world. Many years later, a writer named William Peter Blatty read about this case and used those details to write the book and the movie The Exorcist. Even today, people go to Erling, Iowa to see the place where this happened. Some people believe it was a miracle, while others think Anna might have had a very serious brain illness. But for the people in that room in 1928, there was no doubt. They believed they had seen the face of evil, and they won. So that's it for this video, my friends. But I would like to know, what are your thoughts? Do you believe these possessions were real, and real demons and spirits are acting in the shadows? Or do you think these are just mental issues that are mistaken for possessions? Please leave your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video. Until the next time, I will close the black box for now. Thanks for watching.